Everybody, Steve Gleason.
Hi there, how are you? Can everyone hear me okay? Can everyone hear me okay? Excellent. This theater's location is just perfect. We just popped over to the Roosevelt and had a Sazerac, so I will do my best not to slur my words. Luckily, I don't have to drive home. Thank you so much for having me here to help celebrate the tricentennial of New Orleans. Since I've only lived in New Orleans for 17 years, I'm a little uncomfortable talking about the 300th birthday of a city with so much history and culture. But I suppose only a few of you, like my friends Mark Romig and Deacon John, are old enough to remember the founding of this great city. Not knowing much about the history of sports in New Orleans, I asked around for some resources to quickly study up on what types of sports have come and gone during our history. I was able to uncover quite an interesting sports history, dating back to before the Civil War. So, while I realize that we are turning 300 years old, essentially organized sports have basically been around for approximately 150 of those years. My friend, and New Orleans sports journalist, Jeff Duncan, dusted off his 1938 City Guide to New Orleans. And the material we found on sports is absolutely fascinating. Really quickly, here's a recap of what we found in the 1938 New Orleans City Guide. The oldest competitive European sport, not surprisingly, is fencing, or dueling, here in New Orleans, in mysterious yet conspicuous locations like the dueling oaks of City Park, where educated men of honor would fight to the death, for glory and bragging rights, among other things. The most famous of these fencing masters was Señor Don Jose Pepillola. Apparently, he was so good with the steel that he maintained his own cemetery to properly lay to rest the bodies of his challengers. Beyond dueling, the earliest sports of this city is, to say the least, pretty crazy and totally unregulated. To quote the 1938 New Orleans City Guide, this very early history is full of strange and barbaric sports, brought to Louisiana by the French and Spanish, diversified by the Creoles, and added to by the Americans. Newspapers here, in the 1850s, advertised cockfights, and bullfights, and dogfights, and gator fighting, around New Orleans, where bets and side bets were made. Additionally, if the animals were knocked out, or became exhausted, they were revived during the fight by having garlic and whiskey blown into their faces. So, it feels like we've come a long way, in a little over 150 years. But, how will people in New Orleans look back on our current culture? Will they look back and see a society that is strange and barbaric? While I rarely make predictions on sports, I think it's fair to say that sports in New Orleans, as well as the United States, will change as much, or likely much more, in the next 150 years than it has changed in the last 150 years. What I'd like to finish my NOLA 300 segment on is two things that I found in my history lesson on sports in New Orleans, things that have not changed since sports emerged in this city. The first thing, really quickly, that I noticed that has not changed almost at all in the past century and a half is baseball. It's fascinating that the game of baseball has gone relatively unchanged from the earliest moments in sports history in both the United States and the New Orleans region. I'm a baseball fan, so it's possible that I may be looking at this from a subjective standpoint, but I found that to be pretty remarkable. What I'm basically saying is, if anyone wants to try to recruit Major League Baseball to New Orleans, sign me up. Oh, one more baseball history tidbit that I came across. In 1888, the first intrastate collegiate sporting event was a baseball game, where Tulane beat LSU. As an alumnus of Tulane Business School, it's nice to know that we won the first game of the series, and the last game of the series, last spring. LSU baseball may have won a few games in between, maybe, in 150 years, just a few. Finally, what struck me in my research of sports history in New Orleans, that has not changed since the earliest sports were played in this city, is the fascination and the passion of the people. The connection that this community has had with sports from the very beginning is awesome. This is something I noticed immediately after I moved to New Orleans, 283 years after this city was founded. It's a beautiful thing. In my relatively short 17-year history with this city, that is what overwhelmingly stands out for me. The people, the community, the family. It's possible that I'm biased, but I think the Hurricane Katrina experience, followed by the city's triumphant return in 2006, is a spectacular example of how this community, this family, is so connected by sports. In 2008, after 8 years in the NFL, and 22 years of sports, I decided to retire, marry Michelle, a local New Orleans girl, and make this city my home. 10 years after Hurricane Katrina, I was asked to write a letter about my experiences with this historic city. I'll finish my time up here, with a few paragraphs from that letter. In 2011 I was diagnosed with a hurricane of a disease, ALS, terminal, death, 2 to 5 years. Like this city's levees in 2005, my invincible body has failed me, but like the residents of a city built 5 feet below sea level, I choose to be an idealist. We simply must be steadfast, maniacal idealists. When the world sees tragedy, idealists see opportunity. When the world folds its hand, idealists double down. When the world retreats, idealists reinvent. Idealism isn't for the faint-hearted or weak-minded. ALS and the waters surrounding New Orleans have shattered our hearts 1,000 times over. Somehow, like the local banana tree, our enduring hearts piece themselves back together each and every time. Rebuild, rebirth, repeat, rebuild, rebirth, repeat, rebuild, rebirth, repeat. Many people say the 2006 Saints gave hope to the people of New Orleans. I see it differently. When I blocked the punt on that Monday night, with the world watching, I was buoyed by a stadium and a city full of preposterous, harebrained, unyielding and passionate idealists. We call them Houdats. This city breeds and attracts unique, outrageous people, bedraggled people, who are honest enough to consecrate their shortcomings. Innovative people who see opportunity where others see chaos. Humble people who honor the mosquito and the cockroach. Transparent people who will share with you, whether you like it or not. Persistent people who rebuild when their city or their lives fall apart. Fierce people who protect what they love, and love a great deal. I helped win the first playoff game in Saints history. I have a Super Bowl ring, and a 9-foot statue outside my old office, the Superdome. But what I enjoy most about New Orleans is the infatuated and idealist citizens, as well as the pervasive, nourishing culture of family. Thank you, New Orleans, for having me here today. Thank you, New Orleans, for loving sports. Thank you, New Orleans, for being a family. Have a great day. Peace.
All right.